And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to another Seattle Data Guy live. Today, I've got Danny with me. Danny, you've been working currently at Estuary, but before that, you've been working in data engineering for almost a decade. So I want to talk to you about kind of your experience working in data for the last near 10 years, kind of what you've seen, what's changed, and so on. But before that, love just to get a quick intro from you.
Sure. Hi. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I am always down to talk data and data engineering, especially. It is pretty much one of my favorite topics in the world. Yeah. As for an intro, as you mentioned, I've been working in data for, I think, almost exactly a decade by now. I am currently working at Estuary as a data engineer. Before that, I did a bunch of years in consulting at Brooklyn Data Company and another consultancy. I also started my career in data engineering straight, not out of university, but while I was attending university at a telecommunications company with huge SQL Server on-premise data centers and huge amounts of data. That was a fun time, and that's what made me love the whole industry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot. You said SQL Server, so I think that's a lot of our start. There's still a ton of SQL Server, honestly, that a lot of people are building data warehouses on. So it's still very. I still run into it all the time. In terms of the one question I like asking people before we get too deep in data is, what do you do when you're not thinking about data?
That's that's a hard question. I swear I do things when I'm not thinking about data. I mean, I recently moved to Brazil, so like a few weeks ago. So most of my free time has been just getting settled in, making sure that our dog is settling in as well. I love to go to the beach every day and just hang out there. And that's pretty much all of my free time lately.
And you can't use Twitter, so you have a lot more free
And
time.
I can't use Twitter. Yeah. So if anybody has any questions about this live after, just don't ask on Twitter, please.
Awesome. So I guess since you've kind of had again a decade in data engineering, I'd love to kind of know, like, what do you think? What do you feel like has changed the most in the last 10 years, or what hasn't changed?
Yeah. So I think that's an important topic, and to give a little bit of context on my answer, I think it makes sense to see the previous decade before this in data, which was all about big data, pretty much. And I think at this point we can say that our decade, or the end of this decade that we are currently in, has not been about big data at all for most companies. I think there's like two big parts. Two big sides in this conversation. One is companies migrating from big data these old data monoliths to a modern data stack. But in my experience, most companies in the previous decade have never even heard about big data and Hadoop and all the other guys, and they have only been just focused on the modern data stack. So I think it's safe to say this decade was all about the modern data stack so far. And what I think has been the biggest change in this past 10 years is how accessible data is nowadays. I kind of feel like in the previous decade, it was all about trying to convince organizations and the stakeholders that data is useful. And data is data is the new oil. That was a amazing saying that everybody loved a while back. And most of the effort was spent on making sure that people understand that data is valuable. Now I think everybody comes into this conversation with the knowledge that data is super useful. We want to use it. We are collecting it, but we need help actually making sense of it. But it's there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. One thing I like that you covered there was the fact that things became more accessible, because you referenced things like Hadoop, and I think on the enterprise, those solutions are still around, right? Like in one way or another, whether it's someone has a Hive set up here or there because it's really expensive to migrate. But like you said, like I think what I saw is like in the last, about decade is just companies of all sizes suddenly getting into working with data, right? Like you had people who had maybe a 10 million, 50 million, $100 million kind of top line that could suddenly spend more on data because you don't have to go and invest $10 million into Teradata for the next 3 years. You can, like you said, you can kind of pick and choose some components and pay for what you use. And I think that was one of the big changes there in terms of like why people connect the idea of like the modern data stack is like, yeah, because suddenly I feel like there's some companies that probably don't even know what the MDS is because like, again, they might be on the higher end, like larger companies where it's like, they didn't use those tools. They were still, working on Hive and solutions that maybe weren't what some companies in the SMB side were using. But yeah,
100%. And I also think that there's a lower technical, more technical level to this democratization as well, in the fact that transformations and analytics are way closer to each other, which also adds to this accessibility. Like you don't need SQL engineers, you don't need Teradata engineers, you don't need any of these highly specified engineering workforce anymore. You can just have analysts and data. And to some extent, they will be able to make use of it because the tools are so good that collect the data and help you transform the data that there's, in most cases, there's not that heavy requirement for those super specialized roles.
Yeah. Do you think you've seen any downsides in your experience with that? Like now suddenly analysts can access data. Are there any you feel like negatives to that?
Yeah, there is some negatives to it. I think in the world of data engineering, data analytics, it's very easy to think that the data that you're using is good, and it might be way too late by the time that you figure it out that it's not correct, especially if you don't have that much experience in the domain or the cleaning of the data or all of the upstream stuff that happens until you get to analyze it. So I've seen it a few times that the data analyst who has been working on a project thought that the data they were given was correct, and it was months later when it turned out that they were going off on false assumptions.
Yeah, I think I remember I had a moment like that early in my career where someone was like, "This is the source of truth," and I was like, "Okay, cool. Like, why would that? I mean, this senior person told me that, so why would it be wrong?" And then I think
Exactly.
later on, and I was like, "Oh no, it's been the wrong thing the entire time, and no one knows that." Or the only people that know that there's like 3 people that know that. You have to know who those people are to even ask that question. So yeah, I think that's always been an interesting part when you start like giving everyone access to data is if it's not clear what is the like accurate data set or the various companies call it different things. I think Airbnb calls it like the golden data sets or the ones that are basically certified. It can get very, very messy very quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, again, so you've kind of been working, leading some projects before working at Estuary. You worked, I think it was Brooklyn Data. So what in your experience, what like when you were helping like lead data teams or projects, what do you believe made your project successful?
So I think continuing with this thought that it's easy to make mistakes with data and work on what things that turn out to be useless. I think that infers one of the most important things that you can do as a data professional, which is talking. Not very technical, but it's in my experience, the most important thing to do is just talking with stakeholders in your project. That can be other people on the team that you're working on to make sure that you all understand what needs to be done. But most importantly, it's the stakeholders of the owners of the data. Like in a consulting setting, that would be the client who is working on their own product and collecting all the data and needs help making sense of it. And I think the most important thing is just to take the time, especially in the beginning of the project, and make sure that you understand what they want, they understand what they want, you're on the same page, and you have the same expectations of the outcome as well.
Yeah. Do you have any techniques there to like help people kind of get on the same page? Because I think that's always kind of a challenge, right? Like, how do you make sure people understand, what when I say something, what I mean, and that it's the same picture that they're seeing in their head.
Yeah, I think the most important is to dedicate time for it. In my experience, a lot of organizations just jump straight to implementation. So you should. It takes weeks of conversations to actually map out all these requirements. So I think it's very important to dedicate a set amount of time for it before you do anything else. And the other one is to constantly check in on this and see if the requirements have changed or if you're going down the correct path. And just keeping the conversation going. I think that's the most important.
Yeah. So when you say weeks, I guess do you feel like you need to do that before you even start working? Like, can you kind of start working and iterating, or how do you view that process?
I think you can start working and iterating, but that already introduces an element of risk that you might just get dragged away and just not care about these conversations going on the side. So I would say that it's best to just do it before you start working.
Yeah.
Like, I haven't been part of a data project yet that could not have spared 2 or 3 weeks in the beginning to make sure everything was all right.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe in some of those conversations, but maybe just in general, have you ever had to like convince a client to take on either a different project completely, or maybe use a different piece of technology than what they were hoping to use?
Yes, all the time. I would say that's something that happens in most projects that I was part of, at least. And I think the reason for that because is that there's just so many tools that it's easy to choose not the right one. I believe that there is a right tool for every problem. Pretty much, there can be multiple right tools as well, but there is definitely a right tool for every problem. And in the early days of the modern data stack, it was a lot easier to find that right tool because the tools back then were laser focused on solving one problem. So you know that if you had that problem, you can just go to that tool, and that's what they're working on. That's what they're solving. So you would be like 95% sure that that's a good decision that you made. Nowadays, I think it's harder because the tools, the lines are getting a bit more blurry, and the tools are doing more and more things. So you might think that a tool that solves, or a technology or a tool that solves this problem will be a good solution, but it can turn out that for them it's just like a side quest that they started branching out to, and it's not their actual focus, and it's hard to, or it just takes a lot more time and effort to evaluate all of these tools and actually find the right one. And that's something that we often helped our clients with.
Yeah. That makes me think of like how Snowflake tasks exists, where it's like it's great, and I think they're kind of making that UI better, or that it has a UI now, because before it was
Yeah.
really just basically SQL commands, and then you could have to look up in the information schema to see if it was running, and it was kind of a little bit of a pain. But
Yeah,
instead
there's
of
like
just using
100 more examples for Snowflake.
yes, Snowflake is having fun. They're testing out a lot of new ideas, and all the big solutions are. Do you feel like it was easier maybe when you first started in terms of like the tools you could have? Because like I don't know, like back then it's like if you were using SQL Server, you used SSAS. If you were using Oracle, I don't know what Oracle's version was, but like everyone kind of had their tool, and that was usually pretty straightforward. There was way fewer choices, which was kind of nice.
Yeah, in that sense, it was easier
Yes.
back then, but I think the switch from those monoliths into the modern data stack was totally justified because those tools just couldn't keep up with customer requirements. So you could just stick to one tool, and no decision fatigue and nothing like that. That tool did everything, but after like a few years of usage, it usually turned out that it did everything, but not good enough. So we started looking to specialized tools, and was the birth of the modern data stack, pretty much.
Yeah. With that, do you feel like there's been any new skill sets that data engineers now need to know that maybe they didn't know when you like 10 years ago?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like to say that the fundamentals haven't changed, which I think is still true. But at the same time, there has been many new things that are super helpful. And in my opinion, the biggest one currently is AI and AI-powered productivity tools, namely. I think data engineering, especially, is a lot of grunt work by definition. Like if you've seen 10 data pipelines, you've pretty much seen them all. Like it doesn't change around that much. It's like you get an API, you have to extract the data, and you have to load it in a data warehouse, and 100 other variations of this. So because of these similarities, I think AI is especially useful. There are a lot of patterns in how data pipelines and data transformations look like, and that's where I think AI-based code generation stuff like Copilot and like Cursor and other stuff like that excel. So I think that's one of the most important things to learn how to use AI-assisted code writing, I would say.
Are you saying that like after maybe you build up some of the baseline skills, or kind of where in the process do you feel like that fits?
I mean, I would say that from the beginning, start using AI. It just helps. It's just super useful, and I don't think there's a downside to it. This might be a bit of a radical opinion, but I would recommend having a Copilot on from the beginning, but not. The important thing is to not blindly rely on it. Just consider it another tool in your arsenal. Like you wouldn't tell an entry level data engineer to not use autocomplete in their ID, right?
Yeah. That's one of those places where I'm still like, because like you said, like you don't want to follow it blindly, and in order to know how to not follow it blindly, it's like part of me is like, well, you have to know what it should look like without knowing, like without the AI assist, essentially, right? Because otherwise, you're not really going to know if it's good or not. So that's always the thing where I'm like, where is it too much and where is it not? And again, like it's one of those things where you can sit there and be like, well, like calculators, like, oh, you should learn to do everything by hand, but then eventually you'll just not do that anyways, right, and everyone will just use a calculator. So it is kind of like that, where it's like, oh, you should just learn to write code first without an AI assistant, and then that way what you're doing, and then you can use it. It's like, I don't know what you could argue is the right way, but I definitely see like there could be some negatives if you don't learn to do it without it. So I'm like, well, you want to know kind of where things are going, but again, maybe in 2 years it's so good that really it is more about knowing how to use the AI assistant than it is writing it. But currently, I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like you do need to kind of have it. Like you do need to struggle a bit and understand what you're writing before you let something else write it for you. But
yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and I think it's also a good way to learn about the fundamentals, because you can just turn the learning process pretty much inside out and start coding and see what AI recommends, and then you can take that and do your research. Like, is this the right choice, and what is this, and why does the AI recommend it? Because if you go of the idea that the recommendation is good, then you can look up material that justifies it, or the other way that it says that you should do something else.
Again, there's a lot of ways that's gonna go, and I'm curious to see the next few years in terms of like what that impacts both our jobs, but also our ability to like pick up new skills. There are what I imagine both positives and negatives on that, and I can presume some of them, but I think some of it's just going to take time to play out.
For sure. Yeah.
In terms of like, data teams, what have you noticed are some of the biggest challenges that data teams face, and as well as data leaders face kind of today?
There's a lot. Yeah. I would like to say that there's less challenges than in the beginning of the decade, but that's not the case. Even if some of the challenges that we had at the start have been solved, there has just been many more new challenges as well. So yeah, I think the biggest one is in a data team itself being siloed from other teams in the same organization. In my experience, that has caused a lot of confusion and a lot of delays and a lot of errors, a lot of wasted time and money, and was in general just a source of chaos in many organizations. And what I mean by being siloed in an organization is that the data team has no idea what the team is working on or thinking that actually produces the data that they are using. They have no idea how the BI team downstream of them might use the data that they are transforming, and there's just no knowledge sharing between these teams, and yeah, it's just a cause of many issues.
Yeah, I think in general, there's always kind of been that disconnect. How have you seen it kind of maybe resolved?
I think, yeah, I mean, it kind of feels a bit like cheating to say that communication is the answer again, but it's.
Well, I mean, not to like, do you have any good examples maybe? Because I think like that is one of the things, right? Like it's easy to say like communication, but what do you mean when you say that?
What I mean is that it requires a change in the culture of the company, of how it operates. Because in my experience, a lot of organizations, or most organizations, are perfectly cognizant of these silos, and they just accept it as a way of working or being. And I think that what has to change. They should agree that they are going to change it, and force themselves to actually set up those calls or set up those channels where they can start communicating with each other. And after those communications channels are set up, the next step would be to actually implement processes that could help increase these knowledge sharings as well. Like one of my favorite buzzwords, data contracts, I think, for example, is a good initiative to solve some of these problems. Like you want some way to stop or to try to avoid changes happening without the other teams knowing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually gonna ask, like, are there specific channels as well? Like, 'cause you reference channels. Do you feel like that's a meeting that you have once a month? Is that a Slack channel? Like, what do you feel like like those channels look like?
I think it kind of depends on the organization. I've been in teams that hate meetings and would prefer Slack, and I've been in teams that love jumping on a call anytime and don't really like Slack. So I would say you can be definitely flexible. In my experience, well, for me, what worked best is just having a direct line of communication between the teams, usually a Slack channel. It doesn't have to be more than that, especially to get started. Just a Slack channel where you know that if you ask questions, you will get an answer from the other team.
Yeah. In terms of like, are there any other problems that you feel like kind of persist today that maybe existed back 10 years ago? Because I feel like there's still sometimes this lack of ownership and sometimes still like silos of data that kind of exist. Do you feel like there's anything else that kind of still exists from a decade ago and probably even before a decade ago, honestly,
Yeah,
that kind of persists today?
for sure. I think one of the bigger ones as well is related to hiring and how data teams do hiring in general. I've seen many teams hiring processes and what were they looking for. At BDC, we even helped our clients in their hiring process as well. And I've seen that a lot of organizations prioritize technical skills over anything else. And I think, especially with working with data, soft skills are super important. almost in some cases way more important than the actual technical skills. And I think that is very neglected, and it causes a lot of misaligned hiring, where you would hire someone that doesn't fit into not just the team but your whole organization, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like there's always a baseline of tech skills that's required, just because someone needs to get the job done. But yeah, I do also think that being able to communicate and understand what the business is asking for, definitely is one of those requirements that need to happen. Because what I think I've seen in the past is you can hire someone that's very, very technical, and then they'll go off and do their own thing for 6 months. Then they'll show you what they did, and it's like, well, that's not what I wanted. Mostly because either some lack of communication or lack of understanding, or empathy. But on the flip side, I do think there's this, like, it's always interesting when I hear people say like, oh, soft skills are very important. And I think the reason we do that is because hard skills are so emphasized that it's like, well, we want to swing the pendulum the other way. But I guess I always like making sure to say like, yeah, I still think there's a baseline of tech skills that everyone needs in order to get that.
Yeah, for sure. And I believe that as an employer, you have the ability to teach your employees the technical skills.
Yeah.
And probably that's way easier to do as an employer than trying to teach them the soft skills.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully we can teach people soft skills too. But yeah, I actually I remember when I had a conversation with someone at Facebook where they were talking about how this one of their team members, they would tell them every time what they needed to do to essentially like get their next promotion, which was essentially around soft skills, like improving how you communicate, improving how you interact with other teams. I think they were like a senior engineer and they wanted to go to like staff, and it's like these are the things you need to do.
Yeah.
And they were still just so hyper focused on the technical side that like sometimes you can tell people like, we don't need you to get more technical. We need you to get more, gain more ability somewhere else. And yeah, sometimes they might still kind of avoid that problem because it can be challenging. So
it can be, for sure. And you can tell them to be more social and try to do it better, but that's hard, and you have to put a lot more effort in to help them improve their soft skills, which you still should do. It's just I think organizations have to realize that it's harder than teaching some tech skills.
Yeah. On like kind of going back to AI, I think the hard thing is like I had a conversation with someone where, because like AI is now just kind of been used as the blanket word to cover a lot of things, right? Like whether you're referring to something that maybe is more statistical in nature or machine learning or whatever. But we've now just decided it's a blanket term to cover all that to a degree. Maybe not us, but the business I think has. So yeah, like AI, ML seems to be even more everywhere than it was 10 years ago. Have you kind of seen any companies implement it successfully anywhere?
Yes. Yeah. Many companies. I've seen many companies implement it successfully. And I think, so my view of AI ever since data science becoming popular and machine learning and AI is that it is getting and going to get even more commoditized. Like it will be the part of like using AI and using machine learning and all of these models will be as easy as calling a function in code that you're writing. And in some places, it already is, and I think that's a very good indicator of how easy it will be to integrate and how much of a black box it will become. In a good way, because most people don't have to understand how it actually works under the hood. They can just use it. And I think because of this, more and more people, more and more organizations implementing it as they should, and I've seen many of them use it successfully. I think the important distinction is that I think organizations who use it successfully might not necessarily integrate AI into the product that they're working on, but into the developer workflows or processes or even the non-developer workflows that they are using at their organization. That's where I think AI really shines, and that's where I think it provides the most value.
Yeah. it's interesting that you referenced like, just being able to use it as a function. I actually recently have been talking to a company where that's what they do. Like they're trying to make like AI kind of as a function inside of your SQL, specifically on top of like unstructured data, so that instead of you in the past having to write like Python scripts to maybe parse out data in an image or in a PDF, you can now just write it in SQL and write essentially just a function that would do something, whatever you want it to do, and parse out something from unstructured data. So I do think that's kind of the goal, I imagine, is to really make it like most tools, I think, to the point where a larger swath of people can use said tools effectively, to the point where hopefully it kind of feels like Excel versus feeling like, you have to write code in order to kind of get the benefit.
Exactly, and even for engineers who for example, like write code in Python, like most engineers I know don't know how the function that calculates a random number is implemented, for example, and it's something that they don't have to know.
Yeah.
They can take it for granted, and I'm very confident that AI is going down this same road, where you will be able to just use these pieces that are super valuable to you and extremely complicated on the back end, but you don't have to care about how that works.
Yeah. We'll see. Again, I'm curious to see the overall outcome of kind of what that looks like. But are there also places you feel like you've seen people try to make something like an ML or AI system fit where it doesn't fit?
Yeah, I think there are companies and teams that want to rely on it too much, which I think can cause this discrepancies between in functionality. Like AI, you shouldn't blindly trust like the output of large language models, for example. That's not something that should be like the core value proposition of your product. And I've seen companies use the output of like ChatGPT, for example, to analyze customer support requests or stuff like that. And it is something that you can do, and it helps a lot to improve your workflows. But there, you still need human oversight, and I think that's the key in AI misuse currently. That you shouldn't blindly rely on the output, but still verify it if you can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like that's been the case even with prior models and systems. Like I remember when I developed a fraud detection system, it like all it did was essentially like obviously or the main focus was to essentially reduce the amount of human time, right? Like it's like, okay, instead of you having to look through 1,000,000 records, now you can look through 100 records and confirm that they're fraud versus starting from a high level
Yeah,
and having to parse down. So
exactly.
that part sounds so familiar. Kind of, as we've talked about the last 10 years and are probably looking towards the next 10 years, how do you stay up to date with some of the latest trends in technology?
So I am pretty much chronically online. I spend a lot of time on on LinkedIn. I read a lot of blogs, and I'm super lucky because there's so many good quality content out there that makes it easy to stay up to date with even the smallest niche in technology. For like certain subreddits, they focus on just such specialized things that it's easy. The hard part is to curate all of these and actually find them, because there are just so many. So yeah, I read a lot of books. I read a lot of blogs. I watch a lot of YouTube videos about technology in the data space. One of the recent books that I read was Streaming Databases. I can definitely recommend it. It was fun to read, and it's a great experience because these new books contain up-to-date information about emerging technologies. Now that writing a book doesn't take like 5 years, you can rely on the information in it and make sure or be sure that it's what you're getting is actually like the bleeding edge, pretty much. So it's definitely something I can recommend.
Yeah. What subreddits do you end up following?
I love the data engineering subreddit.
Okay.
It's getting surprisingly big compared to other data-related subreddits, but I really like that there's a specific subreddit for technologies. Like, for example, Apache Kafka has its own subreddit,
Oh,
and it's
nice.
such a great place that it has people committing to the Kafka repository, people working in Kafka adjacent companies or vendors, and everybody is just condensing all of the information about Kafka there. So if you want to learn Kafka, for example, it's an amazing place, an amazing community to join.
Yeah. I didn't even think that there would be an Apache Kafka subreddit, but that makes sense. That I imagine there are so many people that I'm like, oh, there must be an Airflow one. I did notice that like the data engineering, I don't know where it is now, but I remember I think I looked like a year ago. Was that like 130 or 150,000 people I think involved? Which I think the data science one is still probably considerably larger, but I would say I was surprised how much it had grown.
For sure. It's getting popular. Data engineering is getting pretty popular. I'm happy about it.
Oh, someone asked which book was that? It's streaming databases, I think is what you said, right?
Yes.
The O'Reilly book. Yes. Yeah. Good. Cool. What was it? Oh yeah. In terms of where things are going, do you have any thoughts in terms of tech, like where the data world is going? Besides, having AI assistants write more code.
Yeah. I think so. I think what I kind of started realizing is that it is very cyclical in nature, and we started from these huge data monoliths like IBM, Teradata, Oracle, like these enterprise data warehouses that did everything, and then they started to be broken up into more specialized tools because of what we discussed, that customers wanted better solutions, more flexibility, and just faster iterating that these giants just couldn't really do. So that gave birth to the modern data stack. And now that we are like 10, 12 years into this modular structure, what I see is that we are going back where we started from. And most of these organizations, like what we said about Snowflake, but Databricks is another example, they are spreading themselves so much that they are becoming exactly where we started from. They're trying to do analytics, reporting, data ingestion, transformations, like covering all of the use cases possible. And in what I see is that we'll end back exactly there where Teradata and IBM kicked us off, and probably another modern data stack after.
Yeah. The whole like bundle and bundle kind of approach. I feel like I remember seeing a tweet about that where it's like it's the only ways to make money is like to either unbundle things or rebundle them. I think part of it is that people get tired of the current paradigm where it's like, okay, it's kind of a pain to manage 10 tools. Like I'd rather have one tool. I mean, I've had clients who've literally said that like we don't want to deal with 10 tools. So
Yeah.
we prefer having one solution that we can pick and work with. But before, like you said, like the problem was like, okay, well now I feel like I'm locked into this one tool, or maybe it's very expensive to get started, and I really only need these very specific things to get done, and I don't need to spend like again, if with Teradata, it'd be several $1 million essentially just to get started. So it is interesting how it ebbs and flows. It's like a weird thing of fashion, but yeah, it is something that once you've been, I think, in data for a little bit, you kind of see some of those ebbs and flows. I think the other one that you often see is like this constant, or at least like maybe it's like an undercurrent where it's like, are you willing to pay more for technology, or are you willing to pay more for people's time? And that kind of, I think, tends to also ebb and flow a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, we don't want to pay for Teradata, so instead we'll pay for Hadoop, which is like Hadoop itself, you're not paying for it, but the amount of people that are required to maybe set it up is where you get hit with costs. So it's kind of this interesting back and forth.
Yeah, and so regarding the bundling and unbundling, I'm a little bit sad about the direction that we're going into, because I am very bullish on the modular approach that the modern data stack is promoting. I think the fact that there's a huge parallel between that and the Unix philosophy, which is like the cornerstone of how software engineers use tools in a Unix environment, which is pretty much the most popular environment that runs all of the servers in the world. And the core principle is to have modular, composable tools that do one thing and they do it well. And I think the modern data stack was going into this direction, which is amazing. And I wish it kept going in the same direction, because I think that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah. I mean, we did learn that not everyone uses Linux under the hood. Thank you, CrowdStrike.
Right.
So it was very obvious who was and wasn't using it and where it was used. But no, I think that makes sense. Cool. Well, there are a few questions from people, so let me see if I can find some. Which one should we start? There's so many. We'll just start at the top. Okay, let's start here. So when you're talking with stakeholders, what are the key points to be kept in mind that can help make the most in a little time? So basically, well, I'll let you translate that question. I'm sure you can figure out some thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that's an important question. And what I propose is to always show what you've been doing so far, and make sure that they understand what it is and how you got there, and that already like that showcase, like that demo can already prompt a bunch of questions like, is this actually useful? Like, is this providing value? You always have to second guess yourself. I think that's a good strategy for these discussions. And after you show the progress of the project, you should also in detail discuss the next steps and how you're going to get there. As detailed as you can go is the more the better, I think, because so the biggest mistake you can do is work on something that is not useful. And that's what you try to avoid always. So always ask yourself, like, is this valuable? Has this been valuable, what we're working on? And then don't be afraid to say, no, it hasn't been valuable, and just drop it in that case. And just try to focus on what is valuable and align on those things with the stakeholders.
Yeah. I recall when I was working at one of my first jobs that a consultant kind of told me something similar, where it's like, you want to make sure whatever you're working on is seen by people, right? Like, in the sense, it's like, it has to be value. It has to like actually worth the time of like management investing, wanting to look at it, because like you said, otherwise you might as well have done nothing for the last 6 months if no one cares about this project that you're working on. It's like, great that you did it. There are maybe some benefits from a learning standpoint if you're early on in your career, but at a certain point, a few years into your career, like, you have to start going away from like, I'm trying to learn, to like, I'm trying to learn, plus I need to make sure I'm doing things that drive the needle at the company.
Yeah, 100%. And it will happen that you work on something that in the end is not very useful. So try to catch those early and just let them go if you can.
Yeah, letting them go part's hard, I think, because the sunk cost fallacy is hard to let go of. Let's see. Next question. Just got my first data role as a data modeler. I find myself struggling as I lack the engineering experience. I am planning to move laterally into data engineering role. Any tips or insights?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a good start, and congrats on your first data role. First of all, it's very cool. I think the best you can do is try to get hands-on with data engineering stuff. You can do the theory as well, but seeing that you're already working in an adjacent role, I think it would be super valuable to start actually using the tools that data engineers use. There are many resources for that. The one that I usually recommend is the data engineering Zoom camp. Just look it up. I think it's an open source, completely open source course on GitHub. They use open source tools as well, so there's no need to sign up to anything, and just go through that, and you have a very solid base of what data engineering is about and how data flows from sources to destinations and whatever it does in between.
Nice. Yeah. No, definitely agree with the whole, like, if you're already in an adjacent role, Like if you can get your hands on the tools, if you can take on a quick project that maybe someone on the data engineering team doesn't want to do or is too busy to do, that you can always start that way. And I've seen a lot of people kind of break into data engineering that way. Let's see. Oh, here. Any tips on how to improve communication and soft skills?
Yeah, for sure. So I used to be bad, like very bad at communication and soft skills when I started my career in software and data. I went into the whole thing with the assumption that software engineers don't have to speak to other people, which was great for me back then. At least I thought it would be great. And then I very quickly realized that you can't really get anywhere in your career without focusing on those skills. So what I did was put myself in situations that forced me to step out of my comfort zone and just do more talking, pretty much. Talking to people in one-on-ones, reaching out to them, just talk to stakeholders. It doesn't have to be like technical at all. Do a lot of, if you can and you want to, then I can highly recommend writing, like technical writing. But it really helped me when I started blogging about my experience in the data world. And it improved my communication skills a lot. And yeah, I think the best way to do it is just talk to people, go to events where other people from the data world are there, and just talk data with them.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I like there is, like you said, force yourself. So like if you can get yourself, especially I imagine like in an organization, into positions where you have to be more upfront and talk with people, especially people that aren't on the data team. I think that ends up helping, because the challenge with talking with other data people is that you can talk the same language and they'll generally understand. When you have to switch and then talk to business people, if they're semi-technical, they might be able to understand, or if they're very technical, they'll definitely understand. But the challenge becomes when you have non-technical partners. Then it's like, okay, how do I communicate with them? And I think one way I've often heard people say is, like, a lot of people use analogies or just other forms of communication techniques that like help bridge this gap. That you have to understand that they're not going to understand all the nuance, right? Like maybe you don't need to explain to them the difference between ETL and ELT in terms of what's going on, but you should explain the output different. Like, okay, well, what's the difference in the end result? Like, why does someone care if you pick some different paradigm there or something of that nature? So it's just figuring out what they care about and communicating on those things.
Yeah, an amazing way to learn that is to join a company that works in consulting.
Yes,
that was one of the things that really kickstarted my communication skills journey, that I had to just talk to so many internal, external stakeholders, technical, non-technical people, many organizations on the same day, which is pretty much like putting me in a situation that I was not very comfortable with in the beginning. But as time went on, it became a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's always a great way, because you're gonna meet a whole host of different people and work with different skill sets, different different domains completely. And so yeah, you've got to start learning new languages just to like interact with them, and then also translate your technical knowledge into domain specific knowledge for them. So
yeah, that's an art by itself.
Okay, going back to AI, what are some interesting AI use cases you've seen in data engineering teams?
In data engineering teams, like I said, I think the most important is making the engineering's time more valuable and better spent. To me, like ever since I started using AI-based code generation tools, I don't even know, it was like 2 years ago already, maybe, when GitHub's Copilot came out.
About when things started.
Yeah, or even ChatGPT. That improved my productivity by 100x, pretty much. I think you just have to learn how to use it. But that's what I've seen in most data teams as well that use AI, is that they know how to use it because they took the time to know which situations they can rely on Copilot and which they shouldn't, and what exactly or where it exactly provides value. So I think learning how to use AI code generation is probably the most valuable thing you can do with AI at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Less. Oh, I didn't take that off. I left that question up. Less of a question, more of just a statement, because we were talking about, I think, bundling and tools that are trying to bundle. And I just thought this was interesting because so Matthew said, I'm fully immersed in Azure, and every tool in Azure feels separated, even though it's technically the same environment. I think this is something funny with Fabric, and I assume it's Fabric, but I don't know. I feel like Microsoft's had a interesting time trying to create a solution that they can package and sell. So I'm not trying to even talk poorly about any product. I just think it has been an interesting experience. I'm curious if you've run into Azure and what you've seen and experienced there.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure, in gigantic quotes, to work a little bit with Fabric, and yeah, it was an interesting experience. I think the biggest win with these cloud service provider based data stacks is the connectivity between the systems. Like that by itself is a huge boost in like a huge weight off your shoulder, of the engineer's shoulder. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the individual tools themselves are good at what they do. Even if the connection between them is like super easy and you just press the button and you have like a data transformation or data ingestion service ready to go, there's no need to set up any infrastructure or any integration. It's still important to realize that the tool that you're using is your only choice in that environment, and you don't even have to the choice to look at alternatives. So yeah, it's a bit of a trade-off, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense. Going back to books, just because someone asked about books, you referenced streaming databases. Do you have any other books you'd recommend people read in terms of for data engineering or in general? Are you muted?
Yes, I was. So yeah, I think if you're into the data application development side of things, not necessarily the analytics side, then I always recommend the Designing Data Intensive Applications book. It's an O'Reilly book as well by Martin Klapman. It is pretty much the Bible about application development. So it's more application development, bit of focus on data, like how would you write the applications that use a lot of data. I think it's always worth a read. And the other one that I always recommend when somebody asks me for recommendation is called the Phoenix Project, which is not a data book. It's more about operations and DevOps and IT operations. But I think reading that book was for me like a pivotal point in my career, because I learned how organizations function better, and I think that's something that more data engineers should know to try to break down those silos that they are working in.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that you brought up kind of more of an operations book. It kind of makes me think of like I haven't read it, but I imagine it's somewhat similar to maybe Mythical Man Month, but maybe not.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Which now I'm like, I always forget if it's Mythical Man Month or Mythical Mammoth, because I'm like, I don't know why. Oops, wrong. I meant to click this one. Okay. Do you have any tips interviewing for your first data role, assuming you've passed the initial HR screening and it's been cleared?
I would say from a technical perspective, I would focus on SQL. That's usually what comes up in technical interviews for all kinds of data roles, or the basics of data modeling. So I would say just revise those as much as you can. And other than that, it's more about how you communicate, especially if it's your first data role. And I'm going to assume that it's an entry level role. I would say it's more important to show the willingness to learn, to understand problems, and to try or to prove that you can take a complex issue and break it down into manageable chunks and deal with those. So I would just focus on trying to convey these skills.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add is that I imagine, or it is important that you know what you're going to be asked. I say that because every company has different questions and different skills they're looking for. Like even if you look among, like, let's say at this point it's a dated term, but FANGs, so your big tech companies, like their data engineering interviews are very different. Some are more focused on your coding abilities. Some are more focused on your data abilities. When I interviewed at Amazon, they asked me 0 coding questions. Whereas, if you interview somewhere like Airbnb or Netflix, I've heard it's a little more focused on even data structures and algorithms, where I feel like Facebook tends to be a little more in between, where it's like focus heavily on data with a little bit of programming, just because that's the skill set required. So hopefully whoever you're interviewing with has provided you some information on what they're going to ask you, at least in terms of topics, just because it's too hard to know sometimes. There's too many things to know.
Yeah, and what I always also tell people who are interviewing for their first role is that it's important to know that interviewing is like a muscle that you have to train it. So try to do like mock interviews if you can, or just do as many interviews as possible, because it gets a lot easier and the questions start repeating themselves and you will have the best answer that you can come up with.
Yeah. No, I think that's also a very good point, especially with like the more soft answers where they ask you about like your past projects and whatever. What's an example of, I don't know, when you failed and had to
exactly.
bring back a project or something. It's like just have those answers ready to go whenever you're interviewing. Let's see. Is this a question? I'm currently doesn't feel like, I don't think that's a question. Okay. Yeah, I don't think that's a question. Or wait, it does. There's kind of a question in here. So I'm currently doing data engineering and want some opportunities. What should I focus on to upscale? I assume that means upskill my data engineering career, or maybe upscale. I guess it could be upscale my data engineering career. How can I basically amplify my data engineering career is how I'm going to translate that.
That's interesting. I think so. So if you're not going for entry level roles, then it makes sense to start working on the breadth of your knowledge. I think because a senior engineer might get thrown into new technologies. And I'm speaking from a consulting experience primarily. You get thrown into projects where you'll have to learn new technologies fast. And I think that's one of the best skills that a senior engineer can learn, is how to pick up new technologies quickly. And that will come naturally with time as you work through more and more projects. But it is something that you can practice even before it gets to that point. So I would just recommend looking at new technologies, getting a surface level knowledge about them, trying it out. So you will have that basic knowledge required, from where you could actually get productive if you get thrown into a project using that technology.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice. Cool. Well, we're coming up on time here. We got 1 minute left, so I want to say thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing some of your insights. It's cool to hear from someone else who's kind of been working in data for about the same time, and kind of seeing that you started similar on like the whole SQL Server kind of area. I remember actually when I first started, like you hear like Netezza still was, I think, pretty big. I'm sure it's still around. Like again, I say it's like still pretty big. A lot of large organizations still have all these solutions. You just now have like more companies doing data. So like, it's like, okay, some companies of certain sizes use some tools, other companies use other tools. But no, I really, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great. And I will be in Austin next week at the Current 2024. So anybody who wants to say hi, then please reach out. I'm more than happy to.
Oh, nice. Hopefully the weather, I imagine the weather will be nice. It'll be a little warm still, so that'll be good. Cool. Well, any other final thoughts before we sign off?
I think we are probably living in the best time regarding data work. So if you're thinking about jumping into data, I think now is the time to do so. And yeah, good luck.
Awesome. No, I love that. That's actually a really, really cool little final sign off. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks so much, Danny. Well, with that, thanks everyone for
Thank
watching.
you.
I'll see you guys later.
All right. Take care.